Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Um, Today I want to talk about how racism played a part in destroying some things in history for the Muslim, or somehow how racism played in a part of destroying important things related to the Muslim historically. And I want to talk from 2 points of history. One is Muslim Spain, and next after that will be from the Khalafa of Islam, how the Khalafa of Islam is was destroyed due to racism from the Muslims. And then reality, since we are in the month of Ramadan and we are watching the Muslims in Palestine being bombarded by the Israelis because they want to pray in one of the holiest cities for the Muslims. I want to show also how racism from the Muslim have caused the Muslims to lose land, power due to racism. So first, we want to talk about from a historical point of view, which is very popular, is Muslim Spain. How in history the Muslim conquered over Spain, and during the era where the Muslim conquered over Spain, where there was many advances in knowledge, technology, um, education that the Muslim Spain had introduced to the world. Rather yet, it was a center of a central point of education for the Muslim world and the non-Muslim world altogether from Muslim Spain. Um, if you look in history, how Spain was conquered by the Muslims, alhamdulillah, Allah bestowed the Muslims this effort from their struggles. But when we study in history how Muslim Spain was lost, you will find that racism from Muslims played the part of the Muslims losing power in Spain. And if you look historically, the racism came from the Arab Muslims. The Arab Muslims were racist against the Muslim non-Arabs who was part of the society, the Muslim society in Spain, where the racism was so bad from the Arabs, where they kicked out or they made the non-Arab Muslims live on the outskirts, right? This is how the racism from the Arabs affected the Muslims who are non-Arab, where the Arab, once they had the power, they start showing their true colors, which was based on racism and Arab nationalism. It's something that many Muslims don't like to talk about related to history, except for a few, is that how racism was really the cause of the Muslims losing Spain when the Arab Muslims start looking down at the Spaniards, the non-Muslims, I'm sorry, the non-Arab Muslims who were the Spaniards. So when this racism came from the Arab Muslims towards their Muslim brothers, the non-Arab Muslims made agreement or alliance with the Spaniards, Christians, and they fought against the Arab Muslims who were oppressive, and they ran the Arabs out. And then the Spaniards turned around and kicked out the same Muslims who helped them, who were the non-Arab Muslims who helped them due to the Arabs' racism. The Spaniards turned around and kicked the non-Arab Muslims out of Spain also. So they kicked out the Arab Muslims and they kicked out the remaining Muslims that were from the non-Arabs. See how racism played a part with Muslims losing power and Muslim losing land. Next point in history where many people don't like to talk about is modern day Muslim history from governments, related to governments. When we study Islam, or read about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "Man yu'ishu minkum sayyara iktilafan kathiran fa'alaykum bi sunnati wa sunnati al-khulafa ar-rashidin, right? Min ba'di, right?" And the Prophet said, "Whoever lived from amongst you will see much differing. Upon you is my sunnah and the sunnah of the guided Khalifa." So we understand in Islam we had Khalifa. We had the Khulafa al-Rashideen, which is Abu Bakr, Uthman, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, and Abdul Aziz also, right? And this is something that the Prophet ﷺ established for the Muslims to have a Khalifa, one Muslim ruler, one Muslim ruler, right? So a lot of Muslims, when we look and we study Asira al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam wa khulafa ar-Rashideen and the right guided Khalifa, you will see in modern day history what happened to the Khalifa or the Khulafa. What happened to them? Who were the last Khalifa of Islam, right? And if you study history, which is modern day history, modern day world history, is that the last Khalifa of Islam was destroyed due to racism from Muslims. Some are looking to say, well, the non-Muslims fought against the last Khalifa. Yes, but the Muslims helped the non-Muslims to destroy the Khalifa of Islam, which were held by the Ottomans. The Ottomans, what we know today as the Turks, was the last Khalifa of Islam, held the last realms of the Khulafa. It's from the Ottoman Empire, the Turks. And according to history, you will find that the Arabs, before World War I or after World War I, where the Arabs got together with the British and they fought against the Turks and kicked the Turks outside of what we consider to be the Middle East, where Egypt, Jazeera Arabia, Iraq, Syria, and these places, right? So the last reigning Khulafa were from the Turks, right? Now the Arabs claim that the Turks were very racist towards them. The Arabs claim that the Turks, the Ottoman, when they ruled, they did not allow the Arabs to participate in their government. This because they had a bad history, right? Because the Ottomans felt historically, because they were the enemies of the Muslims at one time, that the Arabs will always hold that grudge against them. And they were not 100% wrong from this thinking. Arabs have known historically to do things like that. And the very clear point in history is when the Arab Muslims ruled Spain. Is that racism from the Arabs against the Muslim brothers who were not Arabs, how they expelled them and let them live, made them live out on the outskirts, right? In Spain, in the outskirts, right? So when the Turks have ruled, right, or some will say the Mamluk, and that's another whole long history. Well, the Turks, while they was ruling, or at the end of their realm of their ruling, they became to be somewhat racist towards Arabs. And then also Arabs did not want non-Arabs to rule over them, right? So the Arabs got together with the British, right? Many people watch these movies or hear these stories of Lawrence of Arabia, which is true story. It's part of history. When the Arabs, right, the Arabs start rebelling against the Turks, right? The Egyptian government at the time held the British soldiers in Egypt, right? All this part of history where the Arab Muslims fought and helped destroy the Khalifa of Islam. The Khalifa of Islam, right? The Arabs helped the British to destroy the Khalifa of Islam, right? And that's where we get into modern day Palestine. Modern day Palestine, how did the Israelis get control over modern day Palestine, right? So we find that from the Arabs, when they rebelled against the Ottomans, the Arabs did not replace a new Khalifa, a new Khulafa, right? The Arabs did not replace it. The Arabs didn't decide they're going to have a Khalifa. The Arabs coincide with the British, destroyed the Khalifa of Islam, did not replace it, but replaced it instead with Arab states. This is where we get Saudi Arabia. This is where we get Jordan. This is where we get Syria. This is where we get certain countries in the Middle East. And then when we understand that the Turks ruled over majority of the Arab countries, not all, like they didn't rule in, I believe they did not rule in Morocco, but they ruled over most of the Arab territories. When they the Arabs ran them out, they held a vacancy of leadership in the Arab government. And this is where the colonialists like the British, start taking parts of the Middle East for themselves. So the Arabs put themselves in their own predicament. So who was control over Palestine? Palestine was controlled by the Turks, right? Palestine was controlled by the Turks. And when the Arabs ran the Turks out of the Middle East, that means that Palestine, Al-Quds, Jerusalem, right? Jerusalem fell in the hands of the British. It fell in the hands of the British. So first you're going to establish that the Arab Muslims, helped destroy the Khalafa of Islam from 2 points. Racism from 2 angles. The racism from the Turks against the Arabs, and the Arabs' racism against, they didn't want any non-Arabs to rule over them, even if they are Muslims, right? So that vacancy of powership, the British, with the remaining colonialists, took over certain lands. For the British, they took Palestine, right? Al-Quds, the British got control over Palestine. And that's what we're going to find today. How did the Muslims lose Al-Quds? Is due to the Arabs rebelling against the Ottoman Empire. And when that collapsed, the Ottoman Empire, the Khalafa of Islam collapsed. And the spoils of war, which is what it is called, went in the hands of the colonialists. So the British got Jerusalem, right? Got Jerusalem from the Turks, because the Turks ruled over the Hijaz, Mecca, Medina, and Quds. All right? So when the British got held of Palestine, or we call it Quds, Jerusalem, right? How did the Israelis get Jerusalem from the British, or Palestine we call today from the British? Because the Israelis fought against the British. All right. So I want to talk about from 2 points. Muslims put themselves in their own predicament that they are in today. When we look about what's going on in Palestine, when we hear about the Israelis are oppressing the Muslims in Masjid Aqsa, or Baytul Maqdis, I believe this is Baytul Maqdis, not Masjid al-Aqsa, right? What we call the Dome of the Rock, right? How did the Israelis get it? How did the Muslims come to this predicament? Because the Muslim Arabs, due to their racism and Arab nationalism, fought against the Ottomans, who were the last Khalifa of Islam, right? And when that happened, the people who the Arabs assisted, like the British and other colonialists, they took the lands of the Muslims for themselves. All right? Racism. So see how racism from Muslims, not holding on to the book of Allah, how racism plays a part in the Muslim history, where Muslims are the losers from their open disobedience of Allah. The Ottomans were the legitimate Khalifa. The Arabs fought against them. They claimed that the Turks were racism towards them. Right? So I'm not going to say that the Arabs were wrong for what they claim about the Turks. Right? But we can know from history that when Arabs ruled certain parts in history, like when the Arabs ruled in Spain, that the Arabs themselves were playing racism towards their Muslim brothers who were non-Arab Muslims. And that's how Spain was lost. Then the Turks, when they had control of the when they had control of the Khalafa of Islam. And how did the Turks get control of the Khalafa of Islam is another video on its own, due to the Arabs being Arab Muslims being weak. Due to the Arab Muslims being weak, right? Weak, right? Being weak in a point in history, they were very weak. were a joke. And this is how they lost the Khalifa anyway to the Ottomans, or we call it the Mamluks. That's another whole story. They're really the Mamluk, or the heroes of Islam historically. The Ottomans spread Islam also in many places. Right? Historically, the Ottomans have contributed a lot to Islamic civilization. Right? But in the end, the Arabs claim the racism from the Turks is the reason why they aligned themselves with the British to fight against them, and then did not replace the Ottoman or the Khalifa with another ruler, Muslim ruler, or another Muslim Khalifa, due to racism. All this part of racism. So today in Palestine, how the Palestinians are in the condition they are in. Every time you see on the news the Palestinians being oppressed, let it be known that it was due to the Arabs rebelling against the Ottoman. It's how the Muslim lost Palestine. It's how the Muslim lost Al-Quds, due to the Arabs rebelling. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying in Quran, it does not take away a ni'mah from the people until they remove from themselves the reason why Allah gave them that ni'mah. Right? Al-Quds was given to Umar radiallahu anhu when he was the Khalifa of Islam, due to his obedience of obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and holding on to the book of Allah. Allah blessed him with Quds. Blessed the Muslims with Quds. And due to the Arabs in modern day rebelled against the commandments of Allah, and they lined themselves with the disbelievers to fight against the Muslim ruler, is the reason why Palestine is the situation it is today. Because when they ran out the Turks, they ran out the Muslim having the leadership, or the Muslims having the authority in these lands, and it was placed by the British. The British had a plan to destroy the Khalifa of Islam, and they used the Arab Muslims to do so. Due to the Arabs, racism and Arab nationalism. Arab nationalism is Arab racism, right? And then on top of that, once the Israelis fought against the British in Palestine to take Palestine, right? And they took over Palestine, or took over Al-Quds, right? And they started their government, correct? The Arabs also went to fight against the Israelis, and they lost. Saudi, Jordan, Iraq, I believe Syria, and Egypt. All these Muslim Arab countries, and they lost. They lost against the Israelis because they didn't get together. They didn't get together to establish Allah's deen. They didn't fight them for the sake of Allah. They fought them for Arab nationalism. And them small little Jews, them small numbers of Jews in Israel beated the Arabs in this war. They beated them. Matter of fact, the Jordanians let them know, the Israelis know, they was going to attack them. And the Arabs lost because they didn't fight it for Allah. They fought it for Arab nationalism, because Allah only gave them Al-Quds because the Muslim was obeying Kitab and Sunnah. The Muslim were holding on Kitab and Sunnah. And once the Arabs abandoned that by demolishing the Khalifa of Islam with the Kuffar, with the British, this is part of the Nawaqid of Islam. Some of the invalidators of Islam is aligning yourself with the disbelievers to fight against the Muslim. Is part of the invalidators of Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala humiliate the Arabs to this day. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to this day humiliate the Arabs, because the Arab Muslims, they openly went against the book of Allah by helping the British to destroy the Khalifa of Islam. And that's when the Arabs got together to fight against Israelis. They lost because they didn't do what Allah commanded. You're the same ones who destroyed the Khalifa of Islam. You're the same ones who fought against the Ottomans with the British, with the disbelievers. And you didn't replace the Khalifa of Islam with another ruler. You replaced it with Arab states and Arab governments, not Islamic states, Arab nationalist states, either practicing socialism or communism or monarchy. Didn't replace it with a Khalifa. Didn't replace it. And that's when the Arabs, you fought against Israelis, they lost, is because you are in open disobedience. Well, Allah is not going to give you victory. And the same thing has to do with Palestine. Palestine will never be freed. Will never be freed. I've been Muslim for over 20 years. Every Ramadan is the same thing. Every Ramadan about Palestine and Israelis is the same thing. I'm 45 years old, inshallah, soon. Right? I've been Muslim for 20 years. They've been fighting before I was even born. They will never have victory in Palestine until the Muslims go back to the state where Allah gave them Palestine. And that's by having a Khalafa of Islam on Kitabillah and the Sunnah of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So I gave you from 3 points in history where the Muslim lost power due to racism from Muslims. And I'm saying that now because in America, amongst Muslims in America, you find Muslims in America promoting racism. You have Muslims in America promoting white nationalism. You have Muslims in America promoting white nationalism. I say it again. You have Muslims in America promoting white nationalism. And you'll find them same Muslims in America promoting white nationalism. They will talk about what's going on in Palestine. They will talk about what's going on in Palestine right now. But they won't talk about how the Arabs lost Palestine due to the Arabs practicing racism. Racism is a big part of why the Arabs and the Muslims today are in the conditions they are in today. No one wants to talk about that. That's the elephant in the room, that the Muslims are not holding on Kitab and Sunnah. They're following different things, but we don't want to talk about that the Muslims today are racist. They are racist when it comes to the verses in Quran about brotherhood. They do not follow them. They don't follow it in their government. And there's clear evidence for that the Muslims don't follow that, even in their government. Why is there a visa system in the Muslim world? Why is there a visa system in the Muslim world? Why do I need a visa, or Muslim need a visa to go to another Muslim country? Why there's the passport system and the visa system? Why, if a Muslim goes to another country that he's not from and he live in that country, he doesn't have a nationality there, especially if his children are born in that other country? They don't get the nationality there because the Muslims will practice racism. Racism. It's everywhere. Racism. No one wants to talk about that. It's racism. So when we talk about Palestine, every time you hear about the Israelis killing the Palestinians, I don't want you to look down at the Palestinians. I want you to look at the reality. How did Palestine fall in the hand of the Israelis? It's due to the Arab governments with the British fighting against the Khalafa of Islam. This is Ramadan. We're going to stop lying. We're going to start ignoring things and facts. One thing I notice about Muslims, that we know nothing about history. And this is why we keep on repeating the same mistakes over and over again. The same mistakes. Many Muslims don't know that the Muslims lost Spain due to the Arab Muslims were racist towards their Muslim brothers who were not Arabs. And these non-Arab Muslims aligning themselves with the Christians of Spain, and they ran the racist, oppressive Arab Muslims out. Then the Spaniards turned around and ran the non-Arab Muslims out the country. You see what happened when you have division? You see when you have racism, racism caused division. 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 The racism from the Turks against the Arabs caused division. Caused the Arabs with their racism to align themselves with the British to fight against the Ottoman Empire. Racism caused division. And many Muslims don't want to talk about that. And we have Muslims right here in America talking about white nationalism. Daniel Hachikachu. You got Muslims right here in America praising white nationalism, telling Muslims they need to join the white nationalists like Daniel Hachikachu. There's another Islamic channel
I can't remember the name. There's an Islamic channel on YouTube talking about white nationalism. That the Muslim agree with some of the white nationalist point of view. You got Muslims on YouTube. They got Duat, Callers Islam, talking about Muslims need to align themselves with white nationalism because they have conservative views. Racism caused division. Muslims don't learn nothing from history. Even the same Muslims right now, I bet you those same Muslims talk about white nationalism, Muslims to join white nationalism, like Daniel Hakikachu, right? I bet you go to his Twitter page. I bet you he's talking about the bombing and the fighting that's going on in Palestine right now. I bet you he's talking about how the Israelis are striking Lebanon. But I bet you he won't talk about how did the Arabs lose Palestine due to the Arabs rebelling against Allah, being racist. The Muslims being racist is the reason why they lost power all the way in history. You can find it. Racism, rejecting Kitab and Sunnah because racism, they put racism forward and not Kitab and Sunnah forward. Don't be a YouTuber. Don't be like the ignorant Muslims in the West, like in America. The only knowledge or information they have is YouTube. A lot of YouTube pages, the people are ignoramuses on YouTube. Many of them are ignoramuses on YouTube. Many of them cannot teach you nothing about Islam or the history of Muslims. They can't tell you why are the Muslims today in the predicament they are in today, because they're rejecting the book of Allah. Due to their ignorance, not studying the book of Allah. And following their hawa, and following the disbelievers. Because the Arabs did follow the disbelievers when they lined themselves up with the British to fight against the Ottoman. That's the reason why Palestine is in the condition it is today. Talk about the Dome of the Rock. Who built the Dome of the Rock? The Turks did. Do you know that in history? Baytul Maqdis, you see the big dome? Who built the dome on Baytul Maqdis? The Turks did. The Ottomans did that. How did the Ottomans lose Al-Quds? It's because the Arabs aligned themselves with the British in Egypt, in Jazira Arabiya, in Jordan, in Syria, and they fought against the Turks. They fought against the Ottomans because the Arabs didn't want the non-Arabs to rule over them. Then the British and the other colonists, once they helped them destroy the Khalafa of Islam, the British took some of their land. Look at how Allah punished them. This is a punishment from Allah. And Kulu Hisbin, as Allah say, every group is happy with what they have. Every group. Look at these countries. They're all happy. Look at Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia can't do nothing for the Palestinians and people. Dubai, Kuwait can't do nothing for Palestinians. Look at all the money they have. Look at all the dunya Allah gave the peoples in Jazira Arabiya. Look at all the dunya, all the oil money they have. They can't do one thing to stop the Israelis from killing the Palestinians. They can't do nothing. Kulu Hisbin, every group, every sect, every group is happy with what they have. Can't even help the peoples in Palestine because they openly disobey the law, subhanahu wa ta'ala. They openly went against the Kitab and Sunnah. When people ask what happened, you read Sirah, where is the Khulafa? Where is the Khalifa today? Why is there not a Khalifa today? Because the Muslims demolished it. The Arab Muslims in particular, wasn't no African Muslims did not destroy the Khalifa of Islam. It wasn't no Bangladeshi, no Desi Muslims who demolished the Khalifa of Islam. It wasn't no Asian Muslims who destroyed the Khalifa of Islam. It were no European Muslims who destroyed the Khalifa of Islam. It was the Arab Muslims who destroyed the Khalifa of Islam. Khayana. Traitors. Treachery. Traitors and treachery from the Arabs. Traitors and treachery. And I'm saying all Arabs are traitors. I'm not saying all of them are traitors or treachery, but their governments are today somewhat play part of that. Play part of that and that destruction. And look at Palestine. Only way you're going to solve the issues in Palestine, not by Palestinians leaving, is by the Muslims The Muslims bringing back the Khalafa of Islam. That's the only way. That's the only way. Bring back the Khalafa of Islam. Somebody gonna say, but the Muslims got issues. The Muslim are committing shirk. Hey, you're always gonna have people who are gonna be jahil. You're always gonna have a group of people ignorant to certain things. It doesn't give you the excuse not to do what you are obliged to do in Islam. I see the Muslim the other day not fasting. Is that gonna cause me not to do what is wajib upon me? Because I see some Muslims not fasting. You got some Muslims doing open sins because Muslims are doing open sins. Does that mean that I don't fulfill my obligations? So we can't talk about all the Muslim world or doing this and the Muslims will fall into that. No, bring back the Khalafa of Islam. Bring back the Khalafa of Islam. Every Ramadan, Palestine, the same thing. Every Ramadan, same issue. Same issue. People make dua. That's all you could do. People could just make dua. Now, bring back the Khalafa of Islam. Bring back Khalafa of Islam. Bring back something that is from the Sunnah. Bring back something that is from the Islam. Bring back something that is from the Islam. Bring it back. I said what I had to say. And on that note, 3 historical points in the Muslim world where racism caused the Muslim to lose power. Muslim Spain and the Arab nationalism from the Arab Muslims who didn't respect and oppress the non-Arab Muslims, which caused those non-Arab Muslims to line up with the Spaniards and to run the Arab out the country because they was oppressive. Then the Spaniards turned around and ran the non-Arab Muslims out the country. The second part of history is the Turks, racism towards the Arabs, and the Arabs' racism towards the Turks, which caused the Arabs to align themselves with the British and destroy the Khalafa of Islam, which caused them, the third point, why they lost Palestine. Let a vacancy in the Muslim leadership and authority and government had a vacancy. If the Muslims didn't fight against the British, they wouldn't have lost Palestine. 3 points in history where racism affected the people. Muslims.